Before we begin, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I was really excited to be invited, and when I was reading through the description of what this lecture series is like, there were two particular phrases that caught my interest. One was the idea of professional inquiry. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about some of the work that I do at Rust and about how that relates to the idea of professional inquiry, because so much of what I do as an artist is driven by what I've learned as an artist and what I've learned from other artists and other people who have worked alongside me. So I'm going to talk about some of the things I've learned from making VR experiences. And I'm also going to talk a lot about ethical and moral dilemmas that I think sit squarely in the center of the kinds of work that I do and the kinds of work that you all might want to do if you're interested in getting into XR, VR, AR development. Who here does VR development? Who here plays VR games and stuff? Okay, so that's a lot of you. So I hope that this is useful to you. But we'll get to all the ethical stuff eventually. For now, if you ever want to learn more about me or get in touch, this is all my relevant information. I'm on the Twitters as they call it. I got other URLs. And you can just talk to me afterward. There's going to be time for questions as long as I keep things moving. Do we have any questions before I get going? Anything you want to ask?
Go back a couple slides.
Go back? Yeah, that's a. Boop, boop. Okay. Cool. All right, everybody good? All right. So, I use formats like the one that you're about to see, so it's easier for me to distribute slide decks. So I have a lot of slides, and I'm going to move through them quickly, I hope. If you want a copy of these, just email me or your professor, and I'm sure we'll be able to send it to you right away. Okay. So, as Philippa said, I'm the CEO of a company called Rust Limited. That means I drew the short straw. We're currently based in Los Angeles and Syracuse. And we make all sorts of stuff, whether it be data visualizations, analog games, media activist projects. In recent years, we've focused mostly on VR and XR experiences and products. But we come from a weird avant-garde arts background. These are the four principles at Rust. We're all best friends. We all became best friends while we were studying and teaching at the University of Buffalo over 10 years ago. And we all eventually made our way out here. So I'm that one. Yeah. So after we founded Rust in 2010, we had to do a lot of contract work, teaching to pay the bills. We always wanted to go straight indie, and we've always been indie since then. We don't take funding for projects. We just self-fund and we work, and that meant that it's been kind of a grind in a really good way, and we learned a lot from that grind. And then all of a sudden, this happened. So who here has played Hot Dogs? I know, you would, yeah. Anybody here have a Rift or a Vive setup of your own? Okay. If you want a copy of the game, just let me know. I'll send you a key. So Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades is a sort of weird VR sandbox that combines hyper-realistic gun physics with absurdist animatronic sausages and things like that. And it's very much a commentary on a genre of games that treats people like meat. The whole game revolves around a kind of social commentary that's very light and absurdist, or it gets really dark. The comedy can get really dark. So this is a screenshot of a level. There are about 22, 23 levels in the game. That one's one called Worst World, which is a parody of Westworld, and takes place in a really janky, abandoned theme park in the Midwest sometime in the future. And, it's done well for us. We went platinum in 2017 and then again in 2018. And as of yesterday, we're still the highest rated VR exclusive ever. So you might wonder at points like this, how we got from there to here, how we got from being students to here. That's something I'm really looking forward to talking with you all about during the Q&A or afterward. And we feel really so fortunate and so lucky to have gotten to this point. And we feel especially fortunate when we get to do things that we wanted to do when we were in your shoes. One of our favorite games of all time is Team Fortress 2. Has anyone here ever played Team Fortress 2? So we released this to coincide with the release of the Valve Index this past summer. That didn't work. Please play. There we go. There are a lot of things I could talk about with that video. I'm really sad that it did that instead of pausing, which is what I wanted it to do. Yeah, that's a shame. I somehow lost focus. There we go. So there's a lot of things I could talk about with that. I could talk about the dialogue and the narrative design. All of the characters say funny things when you're hanging out with them. I could talk about what it's like to remix an existing piece of IP. But what I really want to talk about is what happens here at the end. Which when fans saw it, they were really surprised, I think, that we were even doing this. You can rocket jump. And for those of you who haven't played Team Fortress 2, rocket jumping basically happens when, if you're playing as a soldier class, you fire a rocket at your own feet, and it launches you into the air. And if you jump at the same time, it launches you even higher. Yeah, it's a weird thing to do. Okay, good. So, yeah, so professional inquiry, right? So what did we learn this summer? That we learned that rocket jumping is awesome. Yeah, this is awkward. And other fans really liked it too. This is just a fan video.
Rocket and sticky jumping is also in the game, and I've got to say, it's a lot of fun. This is fine. Personally, I'm perfectly fine with movement in VR games, so I don't often get motion sickness, so this is fine to me. But I know a lot of people would freak out just thinking about this. And yes, before you ask, market gardening is kind of possible.
Oh, Soundsmith Daddy, I hope I make you proud. Oh my god. Oh my god! Holy crap! It works! It works!
Okay. Yeah, so this is so awkward doing this on this machine. We had some technical troubles earlier with my machine, so yeah, there we go. Good. So this was the quote that really stuck out for me from that fan video that a lot of people would freak out just thinking about rocket jumping in VR. So let's do a quick show of hands. Who's on the "that looks awesome" side of the? Okay, so and who's on the "I would totally freak out" side? Yeah, a couple of freak outs. So this I'm on this side now. I was not in 2013 when we really started working properly in virtual reality. I never thought I'd enjoy something like this because I'm scared of heights. Anybody else scared of heights here? I get vertigo when I look up or look down from really high places. I've had to work jobs like when I was putting myself through college, like day laboring, like climbing 30-foot ladders to paint buildings. I would just shake uncontrollably. So that's me in, you can find this online. If you look up vertigo, there's a picture of me. It's not true. So some people avoid things that make them feel vertigo, that make them feel that feeling. Some people seek them out. Like this person, which just thinking about this terrifies me. Like, or the Danza de los Voladores. Does anybody know about this? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk?
I've seen them in Mexico City. When you go to the pyramids, they have, some of them are there and they're fine.
It's pretty incredible, right? This is a GoPro ad where
Vamos dar um
Blvds were kind enough to wear GoPros while they perform this ritual. It's old. People have been doing this for hundreds of years. Can you imagine doing this in VR? I mean, I couldn't imagine doing it in real life, but even in VR, I'm like, oh God.
Ti dă mă te scuerda.
Am un nevan canimo. One.
Alam mo, no, 3.
What is so morbid?
This doesn't encapsulate vertigo. I don't know what does. And I think it also talks about the importance of something like what we're gesturing at here when we use the word vertigo. It's not just a symptom of something. It can be central to a ritual that someone performs. It can be central to culture. And for the purposes of this discussion, it's also important because it's a kind of play. I'm guessing it's a kind of play that you're all familiar with because I think every kid's done this before. Imagine the music that was playing before the song. I mean, who's done that before? Just spun around until you've fallen over. Who's seen a young, like a toddler do that? It's like the most natural thing in the world. Kids do it. Oh, jeez. All right, hang on. All right. There we go. Yeah, so this experience is central to human experience, to, I would argue, animal experience. French sociologist Roger Caillois wrote a book called Man Playing Games, and it's sort of famous for forwarding the idea that there are 4 forms of play. One of them he calls agon, and it's basically just competition, right? For him, chess is a really great exemplar of competitive play. Alea would, like playing slot machines, just pure chance, right? And these forms can be mixed together, so competition and chance can both be a part of the same play experience. Mimesis, right, role playing is a form of play. And part of a larger sense, like, does anyone know what the word mimesis means? What does it mean to mimic something? What does it mean in relation to aesthetics? Google it. You've got the internet right in the palm of your hands. We'll come back to it. So there's mimesis and role-playing. And then there's a 4th category called ilinx, which I always misspell. Ilinx is Greek for whirlpool. So it gestures at not just this feeling of vertigo, but this desire to alter perception, right? Taking hallucinogens, riding a roller coaster, kids spinning around until they fall down. All of these things are about altering perception in some fundamental way. Anybody get on mimesis yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
The representation or imitation of the real world in art and literature.
Great. The representation of, or was it representation or imitation of the real world? Good. Thank you. Let's keep that in mind as we move forward. That's great. It turns out that virtual reality is great at enabling ilinx, and as I said, I'm not great at spelling it. And some of the most popular VR experiences on the market right now revolve around feelings of vertigo. Who here's played Richie's Plank experience? This is one of the real early ones, and it got popular. It's still one of the early big sellers. The Wave VR, has anybody been in the Wave VR? Wave VR is kind of like, how would you describe it? It's like like a club or a rave. There's live DJs. It raised $6 million in funding. All right, so clearly people are interested in investing in this. Five Nights at Freddy's, anybody play the original? Yeah, I own the VR version. I'm too scared to play it. Like, just the idea of this happening in VR, I'm not ready. Who here has played the lab in VR? So when you played the lab, did you play the scene that has the mountain in it, like the photogrammetric mountain? When I played that for the first time, it was in the Rust offices, and the other guys were there. They all know I'm terrified of heights. They were egging me on to walk off the edge of a mountain. I couldn't do it. Like, my legs were shaking. It wasn't real. Like, I'm in VR. My legs were shaking. I could not walk off this fake edge. Some people love walking off of ledges in VR. We learned this in 2013 when we made a project called Museum of the Microstar. It was originally just a regular PC game. Some people call those pancake games now. I don't know if you've ever heard that. But then we ported it to the original development kit for the Oculus Rift. So we released Museum of the Microstar in, I think it was January or early February of 2013. The original Oculus Rift development kit came out about a month or two later. And so we were fortunate enough to win the grand prize for a competition that we had designed this project for. It was the Unity DirectX 11 competition. It was when Unity was first integrating that graphics library into its core functionality. And after we won that, about a month and a half later, the DK1 came out, and so we ported it to virtual reality. I was the narrative designer and writer for the project, and I designed Museum of the Microstar to be a tech demo that satirizes other tech demos. So in Microstar, you visit a museum that chronicles the technological progression that led to the Earth's destruction. So every single exhibit that you visit is a step forward in the history of like energy-producing materials from the present into the future. And the farther you go into the future, the more absurd, the more ridiculous it gets, and the worse things got for humanity, until you eventually get to the microstar that's in the middle, and you learn about how the Earth was destroyed. So in this game, you play the role of someone visiting a museum, right? It mimics reality both in its structure and its intent, and you are mimicking a museum goer, right? You're inhabiting that role. Yeah. So by design, we were trying to leverage this so that we could immerse you into a satirical environment. But players don't always do what you want them to do. Who here is part of the game design program here, or has ever worked on games? Who here is just a designer in general? This is an important design principle, and this is one of the reasons why you do so much playtesting when you're a designer, is that people will not do what you want them to do, sometimes on purpose, right? So there's a culture, for example, in games of just sort of seeing what you can do, right? Trying to break the rules or trying to break some physics system or whatever. People like to bunny hop around, and people, anytime they see a ledge in a video game, who here plays like first-person games? Raise your hand. Do you like to jump off ledges and things? And yeah, just everybody does. It turns out people like to do this in VR too, which really surprised me because it's not something I wanted to do. Luckily, as the narrative designer, I mean, this was originally, like I said, this was designed to be a pancake game, not a VR game. So I designed it so that it would account for anybody jumping off of the ledge. The game responds narratively in an interesting way. But this is a video from right after it got released. Actually, this was from 2015, so this is about 2 years after it got released.
Oh, is that the sun? Why do we have the sun? Wow. Okay. Badass. That's a very small sun. Can I walk off the stairway? Oh, I think I can. What happens? Oh god.
Thank you for using the Hedron emergency teleportation system. Despite your carelessness, you've been safely teleported back to the museum's entrance.
Oh.
So he says, thank you for using the emergency teleportation system. Despite your carelessness, you've been teleported back to the entrance. We were really surprised to learn that many people in VR, that's the first thing they do. When they walk out of that entrance room that he was just teleported to, you're on a staircase, you look to your left, that's where he was. He was outside of the entrance, and that was the first thing he did was look over, say, whoa, this is big, and, oh, can I jump off this? It was just the first thing he did. I couldn't believe that because, like I said, I'm terrified of heights. So many people like virtual reality because they get to experience links. They get to experience this sense of vertigo. And I think the thing that was really great about it for a lot of folks was that it combined this role playing, this immersion into this character and into this world with that kind of like, you can look up and it's, wow, look how big this room is, and look how maybe I can jump off of that, right? So we started asking ourselves, what other kinds of links could we incorporate into VR gameplay? So we made a game in 2013, a few months after Museum of the Microstar, called Courageous Cannonball Commander. We made it, we were invited to participate in something that Oculus and Indiecade were doing together. It was a VR jam, and it happened late in the summer of 2013. So we decided to get weird. Like I said, when we got together, we were really more of a like art collective than we were a company. And we all have sort of roots in making weird art. So we said, all right, if people like jumping off of things, maybe they like to go a little further than that. So in Courageous Cannonball Commander, you begin the game in a cubicle. So this is the load screen. And the computer turns on, and instead of it being like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, you're immediately browsing this is Faceboom, not Facebook. It's called Faceboom because you're a person with a cannonball for a head. And when you use this menu, it takes you inside of your monitor, and you get to shoot yourself out of a cannon. We used to joke that it's the first-person shooter. It's such a bad joke. And this is how we describe it. But yeah, it was just one of those things like, if we can do this, let's see what happens, right? Like, let's see what it feels like to get shot out of a cannon. And it was terrible and wonderful, and it was nauseating, and it was exhilarating, and you would just go ragdoll. Like if something exploded around you, if you hit the ground, you would just go ragdoll, and it was oh god. But who here has ever played any of those old browser-based games? Like, you play those? Yeah. We all used to love stuff like that, and so we said, yeah, let's just do that in VR. We also, in a kind of self-aware way, because we had all read Calwa's work before, so we don't necessarily use this language, but we think about these kinds of play, these affordances of any given game that you might want to leverage as a designer. So we made the game competitive, right? The farther you get when you fire yourself out of the cannon, the higher the score. It was part luck. Anyone who's played any of those browser-based games know that it's kind of like, it's not just about the angle of the cannon, it's also like, you know, did you land in the right way? Did some sort of like bird that was flying by hit you at the wrong time, right? So it's part skill, part luck. You are a human cannonball in the game, and you shoot yourself into the air. That's a pretty clear example, I think, of links, right? And we thought the game was really fun. Even I thought it was really fun after I got used to it. Indiecade and Oculus did not so much agree with us. So they chose not to exhibit the game at Indiecade, which is fine. Like, we were sad. We put some work into it, right? But this is how it goes, right? You do a jam, you make a project. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes, you know, we exhibited the game. This is in 2014 at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. There were times in the future when we exhibited it, and some people loved it and some people didn't. We weren't surprised, right? Some people thought it looked awesome. Some people thought they would freak out. Some people thought they would enjoy it and hated it, and vice versa. We weren't really surprised by any of this, right? Because links, vertigo, stuff like that is not everyone's cup of tea. So something interesting happened when we attended Indiecade, you know, 2 months after finishing Cannonball Commander, and it really confused us. It was a really instructive moment, and this is when I want to start turning toward talking about not just professional inquiry, but the kinds of weird things that you start to notice, the value systems that you notice forming around you as you're a practitioner. Keep in mind here that the Oculus development kit, not even the full first commercial Oculus, was released in 2013, right? This was just a couple of months after that. Museum of the Microstar was only the third thing that worked on the original Oculus development kit. So we were really confused by what I'm about to tell you. The game we made, Courageous Cannonball Commander, was not chosen for the festival, but when we walked over to the Oculus booth, because there was a big booth with a long line of people, when we walked over to that booth, Oculus was showing our other game, Museum of the Microstar, as a demo. They hadn't mentioned it to us or anything. They were just demoing their hardware to the public. This was a real coming out party for them, right? They were trying to get people interested in VR, and they were using our demo. And we were like, what? Really? So on the one hand, this is what really got to me. On the one hand, Oculus was publicly using a tech demo that makes fun of tech demos, right? It's about chronicling the technology that led to the Earth's destruction. And they were demoing their tech with that thing that satirized tech demos. Just like, okay, that's ironic. But on the other hand, they weren't interested in showing a silly game, didn't have any political message, and you're shooting yourself out of a cannon. Like, it's just for fun. We're like, I don't understand this at all. We were confused. Why? This is what we ended up thinking about for a long time afterward. Why would Oculus demo their hardware with a game that critiqued the practice of demoing hardware, while not exhibiting something that demonstrated something uniquely compelling about their hardware, right? You can't shoot yourself out of a cannon in a video game, like a regular video game, in the way that you can shoot yourself out of a cannon in VR. It's totally different, right? This seemed counterintuitive to us, right? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to show what your hardware can do? So we wondered, what exactly is it that Oculus values in this context? Why are they valuing one thing and not valuing the other, right? This is part of that professional inquiry, is when you're making things like this and you see how your users react, your fans react, publishers, testers, all sorts of folks around you, how they react. You're going to learn, you're going to develop a sense of the culture that's forming around you, right? It's 2013. There really isn't a culture around VR yet. It's not really part of the public's imagination quite the same way that it is now. So we're trying to figure this out as we go. What's the company's ethos, right? So this is important. So Indiecade in 2013 happened in October. In March of 2014, Facebook bought Oculus for $2.3 billion, which was funny to us, right? Because we were making fun of Facebook. And okay, I don't know if that had anything to do with it. Might have, but let's set that one aside. Why? This is the question, right? We're talking about applied computer science here, right? Like, not just the sort of theoretical questions about what can possibly be computed, but what you do with it and why people do what they do with it, right? This necessarily touches upon questions of values and ethics. And also, when we're talking about values, we're not just talking about monetary expenditures. We're saying, why did Facebook value Oculus so highly that they were willing to pay $2.3 billion? Part of it's this, right? Part of it's the looking up and the vertigo of it, the overwhelming, like, what of it, right? Is that really worth $2 billion? I don't know. Is it? It might be. I don't know. I think it has a little bit more to do with this. Yeah. So VR headsets, like browser windows, right? Something Facebook's very familiar with, allow us to see a particular world, a particular reality, right? When you look through your browser window, to some extent it feels like you're looking through a window. You're looking at a thing. We know it's a software application. We know we're just looking at images and videos and colors and stuff, but it really looks like you're looking at something, right? It's like you're seeing through your monitor. I also want to emphasize the word allow here, right? There's a sense of control and a sense of specificity, right? What reality do they want us to see and do they want to allow us to see in these instances, right? Part of it's this, right? Part of it's just you're seeing these goofy avatars of other people and you're playing poker. But what I've come to understand over time is that companies like Facebook and Oculus want us to play a specific role in that specific reality, right? Like this guy. He's got a specific role to play. He doesn't look very happy about it, whatever it is. Yeah. So there's a specific role that these people are playing in which, and this is the weird thing, in which you role play yourself. Who here has a LinkedIn account? Raise your hand if you have a LinkedIn account. Yeah. LinkedIn's like a role-playing game where you're supposed to play as yourself. You're supposed to be honest about all the things you say on LinkedIn. You also tend to be kind of buttoned up. It's like the social media equivalent of a collared shirt. You know what I mean? Facebook is a little bit looser than that, but still, you're supposed to be you on Facebook, yeah? Interact with family, and there's a marketplace and job postings and stuff, right? So they want you to role play as yourself in an online space where you're not like obligated to do that, right? And we can talk a lot, I think, especially afterwards, about why they want to do that. And they want you to act realistically, like a person would, as if their virtual reality or their browser were actual reality. Now, Facebook and Oculus have published numerous iterations of a best practices manual. This is really interesting reading. For any of you that are interested in developing for virtual reality, these kinds of manuals are not just practically useful in how you apply your knowledge. They're useful in assessing the values of a specific company and the culture that they want to encourage. So I want to distill what I see as 4 core principles from that best practices manual, and by extension, the culture around it. The first is that all VR environments designed for the Oculus should be realistic, and so should the experiences you have in them. The environments should look real, as that one does, and should align with your expectations of realism, meaning, tables look like tables, they're the size of tables, and they're about as far away as you might expect. They have certain specular qualities, right? You can interact with them in ways that you would expect. Does this make sense? You don't touch a table and it squeaks or something, right? And you should have realistic needs and desires, and those needs and desires should be fulfilled in VR in the same way that they're filled in real life. Does anybody recognize this pyramid here? Yeah? That's right, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And this is the foundation, psychological needs, right? Warmth, rest. We're going to come back to that in a second. Because the second is immersion. These VR experiences need to be inviting and comfortable. Again, people need to feel warm and safe in a VR environment. And these environments should never violate the user's expectations of realism, right? Or worse, make them sick, right? Now that might sound counterintuitive. Lots of people get sick in real life, but that's not the realism that people are generally looking for in this subculture in virtual reality. This is, it sort of went around some years ago as a reimagining or a riff or a remix of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is the hierarchy of needs in virtual reality. And again, can I use the simulation without nausea or disorientation, right? That needs to be, for a lot of people, the fundamental, foundational a box that is checked when one is building a virtual reality experience, right? Because it's really easy to make people sick in VR when you don't mean to. So at least you have to start from there. If you get sick in VR, though, and this is, again, from Facebook and Oculus's perspective, you can't continue to play yourself, and you can't do so comfortably. It's not inviting, right? As a small aside, the folks at Rust, the guys I work with, like to say that VR is not primarily a visual medium. It's an inner ear medium, right? The thing that it hits first are those parts of your body that will respond violently to certain kinds of equilibrium shifts, right? And things that would shift your equilibrium. Anyway, the third principle here, in addition to realism and immersion, is consistency, right? So for the designers in the room, what they want are experiences that use the same interaction paradigms so that users can become enculturated to VR. Who here has ever used an Xbox 360 controller? Okay. Xbox 360 controllers are just the newest and several decade-long tradition of making controllers, right? And they all basically feel the same and work the same, right? There are subtle differences. There might be curves and stuff. The buttons might be in different places. We've all become enculturated to using these devices. They weren't natural, right? There was a first one, and then we iterated on it, right? But that building of a culture that allows us to know how to use the devices that surround us, right, and incorporate them into what we're doing, like a talk like this, is an important part of modern design principles. So when you're dealing with a completely new controller and a completely new interaction paradigm, this is something that you might very well value, right? Especially if you just paid $2 billion for a hardware platform. Make sure that you're using, and this is a different hardware platform, this is the Vive by HTC, but make sure you're using all of the buttons in the same way. Everyone needs to use the same buttons in the same way so nobody gets confused, right? I understand why you would value that. So that brings us in these together into culture, right? Facebook and Oculus wants to build spaces for family and friends to build real culture together that connects to their real lives in the same way they do with like Facebook groups and so many other features of Facebook that we're used to. So people need to act like themselves, represent themselves realistically, right? Which is weird when you really think about it as an art form. For a company like Oculus to be doing this, it's a little like a paintbrush manufacturer telling us what kinds of paintings we're supposed to make, right? It's equipment, right? Like it enables the experience. It's the stuff that we use to have a VR experience, but you get where I'm coming from here, right? Yeah. Yeah. Any questions at this point? You follow me? Yeah. But again, why? Why is this so valuable? Why is this worth $2 billion? Take a second to think about it. So I'm going to give you my opinion here, but it's just my opinion. It's about this. Realist expectations prompt you to look at an environment and treat that environment as if it's real. Now, how does Facebook make its money? Advertising. So, how does Facebook convince people to pay X amount of dollars to place an advertisement in a particular location? How do they justify that? Yeah. It's almost guaranteed they'd see it, right? Facebook's a huge platform, lots of users. What else? Right, so they have techniques in place built into the site that encourage people to click. It's about more than that, though. It's a yes and. You're both correct. There's something else, though. Anybody else know? How does Facebook know how many people are looking at an ad? Not clicking on it, but looking at it.
Data analytics.
What do you mean by data analytics in this context?
For example, they know how to target their audiences. They know if it's woman, guys, which, click on certain things, like certain things. Everything they record.
They record the clicks.
And then they create
Absolutely.
an algorithm.
Yep, and they have a sort of profile. They sort of understand that. Do you know they also track just the position of your mouse? So if you just linger over something with your cursor, and it sort of sits there for a minute, they know. That's part of that algorithm as well. That's part of that data that they track, so they can say, you should place your ad here, it should cost this much money, because we know people are looking at it. You're starting to see where I'm going with this? If you can create a culture of people who look at virtual realities and not only expect to see realistic environments, but want to inhabit realistic environments where they act realistically, right? Where they interact realistically, where they see a bottle of water and it is this far away and it says Ethos Water on it and they can read it. If Facebook can find a way to do what they've done in 2D, if they can do that in 3D, they can data mine your gaze. Now that sounds like crazy sci-fi stuff. No, that they already hold several patents that are about this. It's about tracking where your eyes are looking in their headsets. Now, it's important for me to say at this moment, they haven't been entirely successful yet in implementing this. So this is all a sort of like, let's make a distinction here between what they are trying to do. This is part of what they're trying to do and what they've so far accomplished. Not quite lied yet. But again, we're talking here about values, and we're talking here about what makes a company like Oculus worth so much money, right? It's about advertising, and it's about a culture of people who visit the space together and interact with one another And I think, like so many of you have articulated, it's about the data that's generated and the ways in which you can influence those people while they're in those spaces, right? They want to define and standardize, control, and predict what it is that you see. And in order to do this, Facebook needs to convince people that VR is about realism, right? They need people to want internally to experience realistic VR experiences. I happen to be one of those people who's not a fan of this. So with this in mind, let's return to 2013 again. And these two questions, right? Why were they comfortable with a game that made fun of their hardware, but not comfortable with a game that showed off what their hardware could actually do? I think it really boils down to this. They would rather you play a specific role than have a powerful experience that's unique to VR. And I think there are good reasons for it too, right? If you've just played VR for the first time and it made you sick, you might never go back, right? And it's also about the good side of best practices, right? Like, these are things that can make you sick. As a developer, you should know how to control that so you don't accidentally make people sick, right? I also understand the need for devices that are familiar to people. This isn't all bad. But there is a problematic side to this. There's a tension in the middle of all this. There are two sets of values, and they're incompatible, vying for the control of VR culture, in my opinion. On the one hand, you have mimesis, right? You want things to look real. You want things to act real. You want to role play as the real you. You want to run around with a realistic gun, shoot realistic people, bleed realistic blood. This is a big part of gaming culture, and I can tell you, as somebody who makes a satirical game involving guns, we're still shocked by the volume of requests that we get for realistic people dying in realistic ways. Like, every day, people ask us to do this. And every day we say no. And if you don't understand why, you should play the game some more. Right? Because we happen to be on the side that says, you know, sometimes people want to be scared. Sometimes people want to break the rules, right? Sometimes people want to engage art so they can do things and experience things and imagine things that they never would in VR, right? Oh, I'm sorry, in real life. I get the two confused now. It's been a while. There's the group, another group, right? And they're not always so distinct, but the question here is, how much space do we want to provide artists and users to experiment with both sides of this, realism, non-realism, right? So again, let's talk. Why? What made the Oculus worth $2 billion? For me, the big ethical question here revolves around this. That if you can control a platform and build a culture around it, you can set the rules by which that platform is used, right? And one group of things, one set of values, one set of desires is encouraged, it's permitted, it's good. And another one is discouraged, it's not good, it's illicit, yeah? If Facebook can control the hardware, they can set the rules. And if they can influence the culture to internalize those rules, then folks might not even know that you can do weird, crazy shit in virtual reality, right? And you should know, if you ever want to distribute a VR game on Oculus's store, you have to play by their rules in this and other ways. You can't distribute a game on the Oculus store that's designed to make people have crazy hallucinations and like weird, nauseating experiences. You just can't. Yeah. So, to recap, professional inquiry. I think the kinds of things that you should ask yourselves as you're moving forward are, what kinds of rules should define and limit your professional inquiry? And whose rules should those be? That's going to change from time to time. If you're doing contract work, right? If you're doing work for a class like this, if you're doing personal artwork or you're making an activist media project, something that's part of a protest, those rules might change, and your feelings about them might change from week to week, from month to month. What happens when your professional inquiry leads you to break those rules, right? To hack hardware, to violate terms of service, to use devices in ways that are dangerous, right? To put yourself at risk because you want to, let's say, document police violence, or document some environmental issue, right? That forces you to put yourself at risk in various ways. And that's just a few examples off the top of my head, right? Those sorts of questions and the way that you answer them are going to lead to you taking stances in relation to ethics, morals, and the predominant values of a given culture, right? So is it okay to make your user sick? I guess that depends, right? Like, I would answer that by saying, it depends. Does the user want to be sick? I don't necessarily want to make my users sick without them knowing that they're going to be sick. I also don't want to accidentally make my users sick, right? Which is, again, really easy to do in VR. But I do want users to be able to choose to have an experience of vertigo, to do crazy things. Should we value that? Should we value that part of play? Because we don't always, right? The word hallucinogen is not necessarily one that I, as a speaker in a college classroom, am comfortable saying out loud, right? They're generally speaking illegal, right? And it's to say that, at least to that extent, we do not value that experience highly enough that we think it's okay for people to use them. It's a debatable thing. When is it okay to scare the user? In VR, this is a really, really important question, because if you make a room dark in VR, people will be scared. It's the funniest thing. It's all you got to do is make a space dark and put someone in it, and they'll be like, what's going to happen? What are you about to do? What's going to come around the corner? Even if nothing's going to come around the corner, even if nothing ever does, just walking down a dark hallway and turning a corner, people are convinced that you're about to scare the crap out of them. When is it okay to do that? And finally, what are the ethics of role-playing in the way that we were talking about? And by mimesis in general, right? Should you be your real self when you're in virtual reality? This is an old debate in relation to the internet, right? Are you supposed to always be you? Are you always supposed to be you on the internet? Or can you pretend to be somebody else? Or can you just be anonymous, right? Is it okay to be anonymous in virtual reality? There are questions here of privacy. There are questions here of representation, of what people are allowed to know about you and how you self-identify in relation to all sorts of categories and political positions and stuff like that, right? How should you treat your virtual self, right? And by extension, the data that your virtual self produces, right? And how should we allow people to treat their virtual selves, right? Do we want to regulate things like, illinks in the way that we regulate things in real life that cause those things? Which regulations are good? Which regulations are not? At the very least, I hope that this is prompting you to just think that through, because these are really complicated questions. I'm not sure where I fall on all of them. I'm not sure where I will in the future, but I deeply feel that they're very important questions. And they're ones that have come from me out of, a decade now of a professional practice and a set of, inquiries that's involved. Should we allow people to do this? Come on, play a video. You can do it. I believe in you. Nah. Is it going to play? Play. Please play. Anyway, I can send that to you. And, video can't be limited. Whatever. What can you do? That seems like a fitting ending. So thank you so much again for your time. I hope it was useful.